Hi, this is Malia, and I am here to talk about special education and the history and how we have gotten to where we are now. I wanted to let you know that I've tried to use some basic primary colors in this because I think that it resembles some of the different awareness ribbons that are used for some of the different diagnoses that our kids are given, that students are given, that actually make them a special education student. So if you see a lot of blue and red and yellow and things like that, that is why I chose these colors. I thought it was appropriate. So here we go. I chose to make a Jeopardy style presentation for you today. Let's start in before 1900 for 10 points. Here we talk about Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet and the things that were created early on before the 1900s. There were a few actions that were taken prior to the 1900s. I'll move myself here. Prior to the 1900s that led to equal education for all students, but there were a few key points that I wanted to point out. So this would be the first one. And of course, it's the American School for the Deaf. And this was a great thing that it was one of the very first things that was done to equalize things for children who had disabilities. 10 points. There was a business developed that made things a lot easier for schools because they were individually producing their own Braille material for those who were blind or were having trouble seeing. And rather than doing it all separately, they decided that it was important to do it in one location and mass produce it. And so that is the American Printing House for the Blind, also a great group and organization. I'm going to keep going through these. A little mood music here. Formerly known as the American Association of Mental Retardation, this group, the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disorders, has done a lot of amazing things since before the 1900s to help with equal education opportunities for those who have disabilities. Special education, first class, New York. Now we'll go to 1900 and 1960. Elizabeth Farrell was a huge contributor to special education and the things that special education students have even to this day. And one of the first things that she did was to found the Council for Exceptional Children. Along with that, the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka helped to make sure that all children were given an equal opportunity because there was no segregation. So considering the fact that majority of minority students, or a vast majority of them, were considered disabled or have some sort of disability in some way, shape, or form, this act made sure and ensured that all students were in equal educational opportunities that allowed them to get the education that they needed and the education that they deserve, because we all know that children don't deserve any less just because their mental functions or their physical functions and capabilities are any less than the rest of us. So that is very important for us to understand. Another great tool that I think still affects us today is the Training of Professional Personnel Act. I know I've gone through a lot of training to work with special education students. Here we go to 1961 to 1974. The ESEA. Not necessarily completely replaced, but it was redone a little, and it was renamed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. That way no one was left out. So very important. Lost track of where it was, I'm sorry. This was not necessarily something that was addressed specifically for special education, but it definitely played a huge role in bringing in the services for special education that were important for kids with disabilities. So I wanted to make sure and include that in my presentation here. There were multiple court cases, but there were two that really stood out when I was doing my research that showed a big impact and that are more well known for bringing about justice for the kids of America who have disabilities and who need the help. So, what guaranteed civil rights to all of them? And that was the Rehabilitation Act. So very, very important. 1975 to 1999. Here we go. The EAHCA made a level playing field, in my opinion, in education that finally included everyone with disabilities. Now, there had been lots of things that had been done ahead of this act that provided education for students with disabilities and provided opportunities for students with disabilities. But this particular act made it to where governments and cities and states and local school facilities had to all be on the same page. This act, the Handicapped Children's Protection Act, made sure that if parents had to go to bat for their kids, that they were reimbursed for those fees, because it's just not fair. If the schools aren't if they're not holding up their end of the bargain, then the parents should not be penalized for trying to work and provide for those kids. Americans with a Disability Act, again, does not necessarily only contribute to special education as far as scholastically in the schools, but it also deals with things overall, which makes sure that we're not just taking care of our students when they are in school, but that we are preparing them for the future, that we are preparing them for what's to come in life, in college, and beyond. Again, another great organization. I'm going to have to move myself here out of the way. Now, from 2000 to the present, which is what some of us will remember the most, at least those of us who are a little bit older, George W. Bush, President of the United States in 2001, said that this program that he was enacting was the cornerstone of his administration, and he felt that this was one of the major things that he would be remembered for. And unfortunately, he was not always remembered in a positive way for this act, the No Child Left Behind. There have been plenty of people that have disagreed with how things have gone. There have been plenty of people who have not necessarily agreed with what has happened in and through that program. And I'm one of them that doesn't necessarily agree with absolutely everything, but I do believe that there are good parts and pieces of it that we need to really pay attention to, because it does try to make sure that children are taken care of in the way that they need to. So, lots of amazing things have happened to protect the children in our community and in our lives that are just not as blessed as some of the rest of us with a sound mind or a firm, strong body. And it's important that we remember that they are people too, that they need our love, they need our support, they need our help, and that's what the No Child Left Behind Act did. Also, IDEA or IDEA or IDEIA, couple of different names, couple of different things that have changed, set aside to make certain that all children and peoples with disabilities are given the same opportunity at a great education. That I believe that this maintains expectations of accountability and action that affect positive change in the least performing schools. So this was set up to make sure that students in all schools were given equal opportunity to learn and to be given the best possible chance at a future. Every Student Succeeds Act. This act is, again, something that can be a little controversial at times. I guess the sun's going to come in on me now. But something that I think is very possible, very important for our future. Now, To sum things up, I do understand that this is not necessarily a timeline like you would normally see. This is not something that you would normally look at as far as the timeline. But I thought it was a great tool. I thought it was a great way to get us all thinking. And honestly, I plan to use it as a review tool when the time comes for me to review all of these things. I even thought about taking it to school where I work as a special education para and challenging some of my coworkers with it and seeing how much they know. So this has been a great assignment. It's been a great way to dig in deep and find things that are important and things that give us the jumping stones for where we have started and where we are today in special education. So thank you very much.